کنگره ایالات متحده آمریکا، کنفرانس درباره قتل عام و گروگانگیری در اشرف. تأکید نمایندگان کنگره از هر دو حزب، شخصیت‌های سیاسی و فرماندهان حفاظت اشرف بر تعهد و مسئولیت آمریکا در تأمین حفاظت لیبرتی و وادار کردن حکومت عراق به آزادی گروگانها. واشنگتن، 9 اکتبر 2013، 17 مهر 92.
In the early morning hours of Sunday, September 1st of this year, a little over a month ago, defenseless people in Camp Ashraf were attacked. They were assaulted. The camp was invaded by people who were committing an act of terror against the people in Camp Ashraf. You have seen the videos. I've seen them. I've seen the photographs. And you can tell by the photographs of the brutality of this act. They weren't just killed. They were brutalized. And those that survived the first gunshots were taken and assassinated. This was a deliberate act of terror against those defenseless, unarmed people. Long ago, the MEK gave up the right to defend themselves and gave up their weapons. Long ago. And the invaders knew that. And that's why they acted with reckless abandon and a quest for murder. That's what they did. This was a deliberate act of genocide against the people in that camp. Specific individuals were not assassinated, not because the outlaws spared them for any reason, except to capture them, hold them hostage, and then brutally interrogate them, which is what has happened to 7 of those individuals. So they were defenseless. Ironic enough that the only thing they had to defend themselves were the blue UN helmets that they tried to use to protect their life. Because you see, the UN just wasn't there helping out, making sure that this place was secure. Someday, those people will be captured that committed this act of terror. And what ought to happen to them is they ought to be tried on the international scene for war crimes. That's what ought to happen to these individuals. You know, missing in action was the Iraqi security force. They have the moral and legal duty to protect the camp. Well, where were they? Well, I surmise they were probably having lunch with the Iranian government over what's taken place in Camp Ashraf. That's just my opinion. But they were supposed to be guarding the camp. And this was not an action that took place in just a few minutes. It took a while. It took a while to track all those 52 people down. Because some tried to hide. Some tried to defend themselves. Some tried to find safety in Camp Ashraf. But there was no place that was safe. So door to door, house to house, the outlaws went seeking your friends and your family. This ought to upset the world conscience about the time we live in 2013 and a group of terrorists can go in and annihilate an entire community and brutally do so. bring the perpetrators to justice. But also, as we have said on the previous attacks, do not let this happen again. But yet, we preach that. There's a crime, people are killed, whether it's Ashraf or Liberty. We bring attention to it. We say it's awful. But it happens again. Bring the perpetrators to justice. This is it. Today is the day of accountability. This is too much. So the world, Iraq, the United States, the United Nations must present outrage and accountability for what has happened to these people. You know, the Ashraf residents by the UNHCR are designated as asylum seekers. Let them get asylum. Of course, we're still giving money to Iraq. American money. We're shut down. It's interesting. The government's shut down. We've cut back spending over here in the United States, but we're still sending money to Iraq. If I had my way, no more money to Iraq, because until we get an accountability of what happened to these people, we just make it clear you're not getting any more American money, Mr. President Maliki, unless there's an accountability to who did this, and second, to ensure that these people are safe. Is that too much to ask before you get American money? It is not too much to ask. So let's stand our ground on this. Myself and 33 other members of the House have written a letter to Secretary Kerry informing him that it's our request that we cut off aid, stop aid to Iraq until there's accountability, until we can also know that the folks in both camps are protected. I've also written a letter to Secretary General Moon asking him to do all he can to get the UN to actually protect the people that have not been killed in Iraq, the Iranians. My own opinion is the Iraqi government and certainly the Iranian government are in cahoots. You'll have to look that word up in the dictionary. We say that in Texas. They're in cahoots together to make sure that the people in Camp Ashraf and Camp Liberty are persecuted. And I believe they were both involved in this latest raid. That's my opinion. So, let's find out who did it. Let's make sure that the people are protected. The voices of the innocent cry out from their graves for the world to take notice about how they were killed and murdered. Justice demands that we do something, because justice is what we do in this country. And that's just the way it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me here at this most important briefing, which occurs at such a critical time. What is on my mind are the horrifying events of September 1st. That is when the unimaginable happened, when Iraqi security forces carried out a massacre of 52 residents at Camp Ashraf, where Iraqi troops tied the dissidents' hands behind their backs and shot them in the head, where some of the victims were women, and where they set fire to the buildings. This is outrageous and beyond belief. This is why the UN and the U.S. condemned the actions, and why I condemned the actions. In September, I sent a letter to Secretary Kerry and urged him to use any and all tools at his disposal to ensure that the remaining refugees at Camp Ashraf and Liberty are provided strong security. I urged the immediate release of those kidnapped and said that we have an obligation to ensure the security, safety, and basic rights of those refugees. And we must continue our efforts to ensure that the residents of Camp Liberty are safe, and that's why I co-sponsored House Resolution 89, which condemned the deadly earlier attacks in the year. I join you in mourning the losses of these residents and in renewing my commitment to fighting for the safety of the residents at Camp Ashraf and at Liberty, and assuring that the hostages that are now held are turned over and not turned over, and that their safety is indeed guaranteed. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Judge Poe. I like judges, too. Ladies and gentlemen, we've watched over a period of years while a group of people who were voluntarily disarmed by U.S. troops in 2003 were guaranteed protected person status under the Fourth Geneva Convention in July of 2004 in a writing signed by a Major General of the U.S. Army that was reiterated by another Major General of the U.S. Army who was commanding the multinational force in Iraq in October of 2005. We stood by and watched while those people have been systematically slaughtered by Iraqi troops using weapons and equipment supplied by the United States and training provided by the United States, while the United States government has stood by and done nothing. In 2009 and 2011, as you've heard, a total of 47 people were killed in attacks that were recorded on video. The attacks took place while a U.S. Secretary of Defense was in country, in Iraq. An intentional slap in the face of the United States. The United States government asked the MEK to move from Ashraf to Liberty, asked 3,000 people to move, and left 100 behind by agreement to watch over the property that belonged to the people of Ashraf and the valuable installation there, and hinted that this was a price for removing the organization from the list of foreign terrorist organizations, a list on which it should never have been, and was only because of an ill-conceived sop to the Iranian government that didn't work. I went, along with Rudy Giuliani, to Paris and looked Mrs. Rajavi in the eye and asked her to cooperate in that move, and told her that she could trust the assurances of the United States government. And she agreed. It's hard for me to say that without my voice breaking and without my conscience breaking. Those guarantees have not been fulfilled. As the U.S. government withdrew, the Iraqis refused repeatedly to protect the residents and repeatedly launched attacks. There were rocket attacks on Camp Liberty that killed 10 people. The Iraqi government professes to be mystified at who perpetrated them. And then on September 1, 52 of the people who remained behind at Ashraf, as you've heard, were killed in cold blood. Many shot with their hands behind their backs. They had ID cards issued by the United States. Those cards, regrettably, were not bulletproof. They were cards like this, protected person. You're a protected person. This is issued by the United States. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this isn't going to change by itself if we don't act. You know, we see scenes like that, and the sense, you get a sense that nature itself would rebel against it and do something. But it doesn't, folks. It goes on and on and on unless people like the people in this room and like the friends of the people in this room and like the government of the United States stand up and do something about it. So for God's sake and for their sake, let's all stand up.
Thank you so much. It's difficult to follow that footage. We have given, as our country, the United States, assurances to support the residents at Camp Ashraf. And after the horrendous events of September the 1st, which are so hard to look at the faces of these people and see that film and to think what happened there, to know that our assurances maybe have not been upheld as they should have been. Prime Minister Maliki of Iraq needs to be told and will be told that the hostages need to be treated humanely and they should be released as soon as possible. He should apologize. He should try to make, there's not much he can do to make right, but treating the hostages is the least he can do. And we need to be calling on John Kerry, which we will, my friend the Secretary, to uphold the U.S. commitments to the residents who are deemed protected persons by our actions in 2004 and as asylum seekers by the UN Refugee Agency in 2011. There are certain rights that they have coming to them in that capacity, and the United States and the UN need to live up to our values and our commitments. It's extremely difficult to see what's happened, and we need to make sure that the remaining residents at Camp Ashraf and Camp Liberty are treated well. I will work on behalf of those residents and also see that justice is done. Thank you very much.
We've been discussing this for a long time. There were warnings. This isn't a surprise. It's a tragedy that we knew that something like this was possible, and we, meaning the United States of America, did not put the diplomatic and other kind of pressure on the Iraqi government to make sure that it didn't happen. This is shameful. Shameful on the part, of course, the Iraqi government that has no shame, but it's shameful on the part of the United States as well. We have here a situation where 50 of these unarmed people were massacred by Iraqi troops, but look very closely. What kind of weapons are the Iraqi troops using? They're American weapons. To think that we don't share some of the responsibility for this is to try to cover up and to basically to ignore what responsibilities we have when we put weapons into the hands of people like Maliki and these other tough guys who run Iraq and other countries in the Middle East. I'd say it is about time the United States just comes to grips with the fact that we bear certain responsibilities because we inserted ourselves into that region and into Iraq years ago, in the last decade. And we have a certain responsibility because of that, and we're not meeting that responsibility. And that's why we have today what is a briefing on the murder and massacre of unarmed people, when if we would have met our responsibility, this would not have happened. By letting this go and not having a aggressive response to this massacre, what we are doing is telling the mullah regime and their stooges in the Maliki government that they can get away with murder and that the United States are basically cowards in order to actually stand up and do anything to stop them when they've got something in mind. Well, we need to send the message to Maliki, and we need to send the message to the mullahs. No, we are not cowards. And yes, we stand up with the people, the Iranian people and others who want democratic government and want individual human rights to be respected in their societies, that we are standing with them, and the ghoulish mullahs that run Iran don't think that we have the courage to do what's right. There will be more destabilization and more people murdered and more deaths, and many of them will be Americans in the long run. So today, I'm sorry that we all have to be here to see this. And as I say, the fact that these deaths were probably caused by troops carrying American weapons that were probably trained by American troops when we were there. But also, it is time to move to cut the Maliki regime off from any aid, military or otherwise, going to that country. And if we don't, the blood is on our hands as well, because we are financing this type of atrocity. So it's a sad day, but also I hope that someday we can help escort them back to a free Iran that is free of those ghoulish, bloody mullahs that control that country. I hope that we can have that day to celebrate, and that these martyrs that we will recognize that they paid the price for the freeing of Iran, and by freeing Iran, making the world and America a safer place. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for holding this important and timely briefing. Let's look at all of that. Does that look humanitarian? Does that look peaceful? The government of Iraq was to guarantee the safety and the security of the residents until they could be safely relocated. And the United Nations was to provide around-the-clock monitoring of this situation to ensure that no harm was done. Again, let's look at these pictures. Does it look like they are fulfilling those terms? Absolutely not. Yet here we are nearly 2 years later, and most Ashraf residents remain in an insecure environment in substandard Camp Liberty, while the very people who are supposed to provide for their safety are not upholding their obligations. There have been 3 attacks at Camp Liberty at this site this year. 3 attacks, resulting in numerous deaths, scores wounded, innocent civilians, innocent. Attacks also continue on Camp Ashraf and its residents. Last month's attack left more than 50 dead, execution style, and 7 residents, as we know, were kidnapped and remain hostages in Iraq. What makes this already horrible tragedy even more egregious is that this massacre was reportedly perpetrated by the very same Iraqi forces who are supposed to be protecting these residents. Now, I have called on Secretary Kerry and Secretary Clinton before him to demand that both the Iraqi government and the United Nations live up to their obligations under the Memorandum of Understanding to protect and prevent further attacks on these defenseless individuals. I have also communicated with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, begging this agency to help all of the residents of Ashraf and Liberty, and I have personally urged the Iraqi government and the United Nations as a whole to do the same. This is an urgent humanitarian situation. It is a crisis, and time is of utmost essence. And that's why I thank you. I thank you for holding this briefing. I thank you for calling us together. And we will continue to do everything within our power to make sure that these residents are safe. Thank you so very much for the opportunity. Thank you. Thank you so much.
What a nice way to start a Wednesday morning. Thank you for that. In the interest of time, I won't go into detail. I just will pretty well endorse everything that Congresswoman Chu said. The massacre was inexcusable, indefensible, and I appreciate you all being here, appreciate you inviting me. Look forward to it as the day develops. Thank you, sir.